Hello and welcome to our HERstory Lecture series. We are thrilled to have Jasmine Wahi here today for our second lecture. My name is Emily Knight. I'm the Museum Services Coordinator here at the Zuckerman Museum of Art, and I'm so excited to introduce Jasmine. Jasmine Wahi is the founder and co-director of Project for Empty Space, a nonprofit organization rooted in New York, New Jersey, and soon to be in New York City. Project for Empty Space supports artists who are interested in social discourse and activism. Her practice predominantly focuses on issues of femme empowerment, complicating binary structures within social discourses, and exploring multi-positional cultural identities through the lens of intersectional feminism. While co-directing Project for Empty Space, Ms. Wahi became the inaugural Block Social Justice Curator at the Bronx Museum of Art in 2020. While at the museum, she curated several renowned exhibitions, including Born in Flames, Feminist Futures, and Wardle Milan America, God Bless You If It's Good to You, which were oriented around the thesis that visibility is the primary tenet of social justice. In addition to her work at more formal institutions, Ms. Wahi also curated exhibitions and lectures internationally on dismantling white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal structures in the cultural realm and beyond. Recent notable engagements include her 2019 TEDx talk on intersectionality and visibility entitled All the Women in Me Are Tired, and a group exhibition entitled American Truth at the SVA Chelsea Galleries. Ms. Wahi is a former faculty member at Yale University and at the School of Visual Arts MFA Fine Arts Department. She is currently on faculty at Brooklyn College in New York City. She received her master's degree in art history from New York University Institute of Fine Arts. Jasmine Wahi lives in Brooklyn, New York with her Chihuahua mutt, Momo. You can follow her shenanigans and micro essays on Instagram at Brown Girl Curator. Please, without further ado, let's welcome Jasmine Wahi.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. My dog is thankfully sleeping on a pile of clean clothes behind me. And sadly, they're clean, so we'll see how that goes. I guess I'm just going to jump right into it. And keep track of time also, because I tend to be kind of long-winded. So let me go and do that. So thanks for that great introduction. I will sort of spare all of you a secondary introduction because that's pretty much it. And what I'm going to go over today is just a little bit about my journey, what I'm working on right now, and sort of my curatorial philosophy. And so what you see here in this first slide is a quote or an excerpt from Bell Hooks, who is really sort of was a important person who I never actually met in real life, but was really foundational to my career and my perspective as a curator. And this passage in particular, Feminism is for Everybody, Passionate Politics, was the first book of Bell's that I read, and it was really life-changing for me. And so if you have not read it, I strongly recommend it, as well as Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist. And just to sort of jump right in. So I am the founder and co-director of an organization called Project for Empty Space. And here's a sort of installation shot of what we have up right now. This organization I started 12 years ago, sort of as a whim. And I say that in all truth, because it was never meant to be an organization. When I started it, it was with a partner. Both of us had lost our jobs during the market crash, or sort of the ripple effect of the market crash of 2008. The spaces that we were working for closed. Neither of us were particularly interested or good at working in the commercial art space. And both of us really wanted to be curators. And so we took the opportunity. We did a bit of crowdfunding and did what we thought was going to be a one-off project in an abandoned lot in Lower Manhattan, where I was living at the time. And that one project over time kind of organically morphed into an organization. So from the first project, we started collaborating with other curators and artists in different empty spaces across the world, really. And working sort of in tandem to create site-specific projects with artists. And we did one of these collaborative projects in Newark, New Jersey, where our brick and mortar space is right now. And that one project ended up turning into a series of 6 or 7 exhibitions over 2 years, featuring, I think, something like close to 200 artists overall. And these were thematic exhibitions oriented around social discourse. And at a certain point in that journey, as a formerly nomadic organization, my now co-director, Rebecca Jample, and I had the opportunity to make a permanent home in Newark, which is how we ended up there. And so what we did was we built out in the space that we were in, which was a former office space that had also been vacant for, I guess, since 2010 as well. We worked with the owners of the building at the time and transformed an office space into an art space. And so we built out a white box gallery. Oh, I think there's someone in the waiting room, by the way. We built out a white box gallery and about 30 artist studios as part of a sustainability model, and ended up with what is now this permanent space in downtown Newark. And where we are now, we actually outgrew our original space and moved into a standalone building, unfortunately at the beginning of 2020. So not the greatest timing to open a artist studio facility / gallery space, but we did it and we're still here. But over time, the organization has really evolved and matured into a space that is definitively oriented around social discourse and social justice, and supports artists who are interested in those two ideas. And also over time, our programs have grown and morphed and expanded, really based on what Rebecca and I want to do and what we feel is important. And so the way we think of what was once a small organization, we no longer think about it as an organization, but we think about it as an ecosystem. And so the sort of components of this ecosystem are a gallery with opportunities for artists to have subsidized studio space. And the way that they're subsidized is we work with the building owners to sort of have a rent arrangement where we can still offer studios at affordable rates to artists who are really coming from all over the metropolitan tri-state area. So from Philadelphia, from New York, from New Jersey. We also have 2 artist in residence programs that are sort of generally dedicated to artists interested in various aspects of social engagement. And then a specific residency called the Feminist Incubator, which is for more emerging artists who are interested in feminist discourse. We have a publishing section that was started by my partner, unbeknownst to me, during the pandemic. And then recently we opened a Newark artist database and became grantors or re-grantors for artists in the Newark area through the Andy Warhol Foundation. So these are just a couple of images from programs and projects that we have done in the past 6 to 7 years. I'm sort of starting to lose track of time. What is time? During and after this pandemic, time means nothing. But these are a couple images from various artists in residence who have done shows in our spaces. And so our philosophy as directors / curators / facilitators and activists is really, if we dream it and we want it, we make it happen. What you're seeing here is sort of the byproduct of our feminist incubator program, which emerged in the beginning of 2017. We knew that we wanted to create an incubator for artists interested in intersectional feminism. We also knew we wanted to create a more broad community space. And so we started the Feminist Reading Lounge, which is a space where anyone can come sit in the reading lounge. Of course, it's slightly different now because of COVID, but be in company and conversation with resources, as you see here. And there are also many of them are accessible online. And this is because we thought it's really important not just to have a space where people can see art, and not just a space for artists to make art, but also for communities, plural, to be in conversation. So just to move sort of quickly away from Project for Empty Space, and also I'm happy to answer any questions at the end about what we do there in Newark. Oh, and I should mention, actually, as it says in my bio, we are about to expand our sort of ecosystem / galaxy back to New York City, where we originally started with a series of small satellite spaces that will function as artist residencies / project spaces for artists of the global majority or BIPOC artists to kind of realize their sort of greatest visions for the future. And so that's something we're working on, which will happen probably towards the end of this year, as we're still trying to kind of navigate coming out of COVID and finding new spaces and all of that. So I guess to close out that section about Project for Empty Space, the sort of takeaway I hope people get from a curator run or creative run space is that it is a constant hustle, but it's also incredibly rewarding to be able to have the freedom and flexibility to do whatever you want as a creative, and to really cultivate communities and camaraderie in a way that larger institutions, older institutions with lots of bureaucratic structures don't necessarily always allow for. Of course, I'm also a former institutional curator as well, which I'll get to in a little bit, and happy to answer questions about that as well. So now to pivot a little bit to some of my other projects that are not Project for Empty Space related. I have been doing sort of independent shows since I really started working as a curator in 2008, 9-ish, perhaps a little bit before. If you ask my mother, she would say I started curating when I was like 8 years old by putting on exhibitions on our porch, which is slightly embarrassing, but I guess as the adage goes, everything you needed to know you learned in kindergarten. But to go back to some of the other shows, most of my exhibitions outside of Project for Empty Space are oriented around social justice, again, hence me eventually being the social justice curator at the Bronx Museum. And my philosophy as a curator is that good art reflects contemporary moments, and I guess, for lack of a better term, the human condition. And so one of my favorite shows that I have done in the recent past was called American Truth at the SVA Chelsea Galleries, which was a massive space in the Chelsea Art District here in New York City. It was about 8,000 square feet of space that was all mine to play with. So I put on a lens-based exhibition that was rooted in the idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth, which I did not realize was such a sort of contentious proposition. I got many somewhat contentious discussions with people. But the reason I say that there's no such thing as absolute truth, and that was the crux of the exhibition, was that truth is rooted in perspective. And truth and fact sometimes are the same, but often are not. And I came to this conclusion because as I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this exhibition, I Googled American Truth. And keep in mind, this was at sort of really a sort of heightened state of awareness around divisions in this country, political, socio-political divisions, philosophical divisions, which I would say still continue today, but this was a very particular moment when we were really talking about it in a very active way. And so I Googled American Truth, and the first thing that came up was a website, americantruth.org, I think. It's either .org or .com, and it is a far news outlet that purports to share the truth about what is happening in this country. And what I realized as I was scrolling through this website is that what they were listing as truth or fact is diametrically opposed to what I believe is truth or fact. And from that, I realized that the idea of truthfulness is, again, in the eye of the beholder, or based on your perspective or positionality. And so from that, I came up with this exhibition that was in some ways in opposition to everything that I saw on that particular organization's website, and in other ways kind of challenging this idea of hegemony and structures that kind of encapsulate what this country is. And so I divided this show based on non-truths or perspectives into a series of different sections. And it's embarrassing to say this, but I can't remember what each and every section was. There was one on the American family, and it demonstrated different types of family structures. There was one which you see here on what it means to be American, or what Americans look like. There was one on play in America and American institutions. And then the final section, which you'll see in a second, was called America's Favorite Pastime, Violence. And before I get to that, I want to share a little bit about this particular image, which was in the section about what it means to be an American. These are a series of large-scale vinyl photo prints by Star Montana, who is a lens-based artist out in LA. And these are photographs of Star's community. And the reason I'm sharing this one and the next one is because they're interesting, but also because one of the things that went into the show was a collaborative effort between the artist and I to figure out what to put up and how to put it up. My process as a curator really is to work with artists rather than sort of having a sort of hierarchical methodology where I just simply go in and pick what I want. There's always a conversation. And so it's more collaboration than I guess a more traditional method of curating. And so originally these photos by Starr were meant to be printed at 20 by 30 and framed on the wall. And I asked them if they would be interested in blowing them up large scale, because I think it's important when you're talking about what it looks like to be an American to really have the impact, the visual impact, to contend with the figures in these portraits. And so ultimately, they agreed, and we decided to print them this way in this vinyl as really a way for people to, as I like to say, and museum people hate it when I say this, but for people to really get their noses into the work and be in conversation with the sitters in each photograph. The same thing went for this installation, which was the final part of the exhibition in the section about violence. It is my contention that this country is obsessed with violence, whether it is as a form of entertainment or as a form of generating capital. It's really deeply embedded in our cultural zeitgeist and inescapable. I don't think it's necessarily specific to this country, but as this was a show about America, it was framed as being an American problem or pastime. So the photographs that you see here are from a series by Kathy Shore. It's an ongoing series called Shot. She is a survivor of gun violence, and shortly after her recovery, she began taking photographs of people across the country who are also survivors of gun violence. And there's no specific agenda with the type of violence that it is, but really this project is an opportunity for people to share their own stories and experiences. These photographs were also originally meant to be much smaller in scale. If I remember correctly, they were around 11 inches wide. And again, I had a conversation with her about the impact of illustrating violence. And I will note that this particular section and these particular works were something that I got some flack for, particularly because people consider images like this, as well as some of the other pieces that were in this section, to be exploitative and sort of capitalizing on violence, creating spectacle out of violence. I think it's a valid critique, but I also have many other thoughts about the importance of illustrating certain types of violence. And I understand that images of violence can be triggering. And so I'm particularly interested now in this sort of space in between, or the idea of duality or multiplicity, the idea that something that is both, something can be exploitative, but also be important to see. And that has been something that I've considered quite a bit as I move forward in my work since this show, to think about these dichotomies as not being mutually exclusive, but existing simultaneously, and sort of leaning into the problematics, as you'll see in some of the next images. Let me check my time. Oh, good. I'm good on time. So this show was the last thing that I did in 2020. I'm sorry, in 2019. And while I was planning this show, I was working on another exhibition that came together very quickly. It is maybe one of the exhibitions that I'm best known for better or worse. And also, again, plays into this dichotomy of problematic discourse that I'm interested in. Oops, there we go. So this exhibition, which ended up actually being two exhibitions, was called Abortion is Normal. Most of my projects as a curator come from things that are happening around me in my life, in people who are close to me's lives. As a social curator, I guess that's sort of a normal thing that it would just be. Everything I do is kind of reactive. And unfortunately, many of the things that I'm reacting to are long-term systemic issues, such as the issue of reproductive justice. So in the late spring, early summer of 2019, a sort of new wave of proposed restrictive abortion laws were sort of springing up all over the country. And I think it was a law that was presented to Congress in Alabama that really kind of spurred this exhibition. And I can't remember exactly what day it was or even what they were trying to pass, but I do remember as I was watching it go before the court, I was texting a friend and colleague, faculty colleague of mine, Marilyn Minter, and I was like, this is really crazy. What should we do? And she was like, I think she responded, I saved the text message somewhere. She responded, I don't know what the fuck to do. I'm tearing my hair out. And I was like, well, Marilyn, maybe we can do something more productive than tearing your hair out. And she is older. She's in her 70s now. And she's like, I've basically been dealing with this fight the majority of my adult life. And I'm tired of it. And I said, well, maybe it's time to, as artists, think about ways that we can use our area of expertise as a way to generate support and generate attention around this issue. And one of the reasons for doing that was because she was like, I'm too old to march now. And I said, okay, well, let's think about the ways that we are in our wheelhouse that we can create sort of social impact. And so from that was born this exhibition. Marilyn brought in a few collaborators to help us, Lori Simmons, Gina Nani, and Sandy Tate, who are all artists, activists, scholars. I brought Rebecca, my partner, and we initially thought that this show was going to be like a small 1 week long show. And as we started to do outreach to people, it just kept growing. It ended up being, I think, close to 65 artists across 2 spaces in New York City. It was one of the most stressful exhibitions that I've done because we really pulled the entire thing together in about 6 months. And as we were pulling it together, there was a bit of discussion and there was sort of a rift in our group about what the structure of the exhibition should be. So some of us thought that the exhibition should just be whatever work that we could sell and raise money for Planned Parenthood and a number of other smaller grassroots reproductive care organizations. I was in the camp that I wanted to do an exhibition that was really curated and addressing this idea of reproductive justice as well as body autonomy. And eventually we met in the middle and I said, we're going to do a curated show, but the curated show will be for sale. And so everyone kind of ended up being happy about that. We ended up raising, I think, close to $300,000 in about 4 weeks from this exhibition, which was wonderful. And we also still maintained what I would consider to be the integrity of a social justice exhibition. One thing or two things I want to note about the show are one, we chose the title very intentionally to be contentious. We knew it would get a buzz out of people. The statement "abortion is normal," I have found makes people very upset. It is a title that is meant to be punchy and is also meant to be open to interpretation. Our interpretation is that normal is equivalent to anything that should be regular. And so in our perspective, reproductive care should be as mundane, as accessible as getting your teeth cleaned. It's a choice. The other thing about the title that in hindsight was maybe detrimental to the larger message of the show was that even though abortion is in the title of the show, it was actually more about the idea that body autonomy and choice in any realm is a human right. So it doesn't have to be myopically about abortion procedures, but really about the choice to do what you want with your body. And so I say that the title kind of detracted from that because people see this title and that's immediately what they think. I learned something that I already knew, but sort of relearned it during this exhibition, that no one actually reads wall text when they come into an exhibition, or very few people do. And so that element of focus on bodily autonomy more generally was kind of lost on people. But in making this show, we tried to be as inclusive with this idea of bodily autonomy in mind as possible. So we have artists of all ages and points in their career, of all gender identities and sexual orientations. Some of them are not addressing reproductive justice at all, but instead addressing ideas of choice around their bodies, as you'll see in the next few slides. And ultimately, we tried to make it as sort of multi-positional and intersectional as possible. And these are just a few installation shots. Some of the artists you may recognize, some of them may be unfamiliar. And these are images from the first leg of the exhibition. This is the second part that took place at Arsenal Contemporary. And somehow in between this, I had done an exhibition in Tokyo, which had the same title as my TED Talk, called All the Women in Me Are Tired. And so looking back at all these exhibitions in hindsight, I realized that they're all very interconnected, which I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Maybe in some ways it feels redundant. But again, they're all things that are very personal and sort of rooted in my own experience navigating the world. So here we have Carrie Mae Weems. Here is an image sort of demonstrating what I was talking about, the larger impetus for the exhibition. On the left, you have a stained glass piece of Henrietta Lacks's Cells, done by the artist Christopher Myers. And this is a nod to lack of agency, lack of autonomy and choice in what happens to one's body. On the right is a detail shot from an installation by Electric KB, again, approaching the idea of choice and agency in making changes to live one's truest self. So these were in the exhibition, of course. Some people didn't understand why they were included in the exhibition. And again, that is because they did not read the wall text. As part of this exhibition, even though it was a very condensed timeline and we were all sort of killing ourselves trying to pull it together, we did think it was really important to do public programming to open the floor for discourse. And so we had a series of events open to the public during the second part of the exhibition. On the left is image from a open conversation that we had about talking to your children about reproductive rights with a series of artists, curators, and activists. And on the right, we had invited a Newark-based collective called A Womb of Violet, which is comprised of a number of Black women poets, all in Newark, who were responding to this prompt of abortion is normal and reproductive justice and reproductive access, reproductive care access for women of color. This was the crowning achievement of my entire career to date, is being featured on the front page of Breitbart News. Nothing has made me prouder in my life, and I actually have this framed in my living room behind me. So now another pivot, okay, good on time, to the work that I did at the Bronx Museum. It just occurred to me that everything I'm showing you is from the past 4 years, I guess, so from 2019 to now. And I guess I've just had a very full few years. So shortly after my exhibition at SVA Galleries, while we were doing the Abortion is Normal shows and the show that I was doing in Japan, I was approached by the Bronx Museum to be their inaugural social justice curator, which was obviously a new position endowed in the name of the former director, Holly Block, who passed away from cancer. And so an anonymous donor provided this endowment. And I was asked to pull together very quickly a series of exhibitions oriented around a thesis of my choice. And I guess one of the things about running a nonprofit space is you're used to being nimble and just sort of doing things as they're thrown at you. So it kind of all worked out. All of the shows were basically pulled together over Zoom in a 6-month period. My thesis at the Bronx Museum was that visibility is the primary tenet of social justice. So really kind of breaking down not necessarily what social justice is or how people interpret it, but simply the building blocks of what goes into social justice work. And my assertion is that no one will know that there's a problem if they can't see it. So you don't know what you don't know. So being sort of creating visibility, particularly around what many people refer to as marginalized communities, is important for larger masses to see, not only the communities that we are referring to, but also a larger white public, a larger affluent public. And this is sort of, again, where this tension between exploitation of violence, and information come together. And again, something that I was very interested in. But really, put super simply, you have to see something to know it. And so visibility is important. And so all of the exhibitions I did while at the museum were loosely in response to this prompt. The first exhibition that I did there was actually a traveling show, Sean Leonardo's A Breath of Empty Space. Without getting sort of too deep into the minutia of the scandal, this show was originally slated for another institution. That institution canceled it during the summer of 2020, during the time of resurgent protests around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. That institution shied away from doing this exhibition. Sean is a fellow New Yorker and a longtime friend of mine. And so when that happened, I reached out to him and said, I would love to show this show if you're open to it at the Bronx Museum. And so he very graciously agreed. And he and the curator, John Chach, the originating curator, we just kind of pulled it together very quickly, got the work from where it was being held and brought it to the Bronx Museum. And it was really a exciting moment to bring this work back to New York, to bring it to the Bronx, which is historically a borough in New York that has been ignored by the rest of the city. It is predominantly people of color. It is predominantly lower income, historically does have quite a bit of violence, gun violence, and police brutality. At least these are things that people think of when they think of the Bronx. Obviously, it's much more nuanced and complicated and beautiful than that. But there was something to be said about bringing a show about police brutality back to this borough. An important part of this exhibition, and actually not important, an essential part of this exhibition, was the programming that went along with it, because obviously the images that you're seeing are images of violence, police brutality specifically. And so we did a lot of community programs, unfortunately all on Zoom, which made it a bit more difficult to have some of these kind of difficult and vulnerable conversations, but somehow we made it through. And what came out of it was, I think, a very unique discourse specific to this borough that didn't happen at any of the other locations where the show is shown. The other locations really were in more affluent institutions, in affluent areas, particularly for a white audience. And that dynamic obviously changed quite a bit when it was at the Bronx Museum. A little note about this show is the images that you see are all critiques of the way the media portrays state violence, particularly specifically against Black and brown people. What Sean Leonardo does is take readily available images from online open source images that portray these very violent moments, and then renders them in charcoal. And some of them, unfortunately, you can't really see it in these photos. It's very hard to photograph, but in some of the pieces, he also has a mirror tint frame that goes over, or plate that goes over the images. And what he does in rendering these is actually obfuscate the victim of violence as a way to pivot the focus onto the perpetrators. So here you'll see the image of the Rodney King, violence against Rodney King. And what Sean was looking at and is looking at in this ongoing series is the way in which we remember in our collective memory what happened. So if you look at this image, you'll see there are the people you can see kicking the removed figure on the floor. And what most people remember is a cropped image of this incident. Most of the media imagery was just focused on the people doing the active violence. And as Sean dug around, he found the original photograph, which includes all of the observers. And in recreating this moment, he's recreating an indictment of everyone who was a bystander and asserting that they are also perpetuators of this violence. So it's not just the idea of a few bad egg cops, but really a larger systemic issue. And so that was kind of the crux of the show. And it was really refreshing and enlightening to have conversations like this during this particular moment with the artists and with the community in the Bronx. So now I'm running low on time, so I'm going to sort of whip through the other shows that I did there. Really the biggest show that I did while at the museum was a show on futurisms, which a lot of museums have. And as I was thinking about it, I wanted to think about a way that I could put a new kind of spin on a futurist show. And so I came up with this idea inspired by a variety of different sources, but originally inspired by Octavia Butler's writing, and then sort of secondarily inspired by the film Born in Flames by Lizzie Borden. And thinking about the ways that artists, feminist artists, think about what futurism could be. And what you see here is a exterior vinyl installation that we did outside the museum at a very trafficked corner. This is the first time the museum had actually utilized these atrium windows. And it was an invitation into the exhibition designed by my partner, Rebecca, and featuring the film still that was used in the original 1984 poster from Born in Flames. So what I did with this exhibition was I invited a sort of wide swath of feminist artists of color to share with me what their visions of futurity are, whether they be dystopian, utopian, anything in between. And my objective with the show was to really create a galaxy as a nod to early Afrofuturism, thinking about people of color, specifically Black people, and then later Asian futurisms, going into space, finding other planets for safety and sanctuary. And so from that, I said, okay, let's create a galaxy within the museum where each artist has their own kind of space within which they can articulate the ways in which they think of the future. So some of the objects in the show would be considered artifacts from these worlds that the artists are creating. I will say this show was created all remotely, which was a very strange new challenge. So here, this site-specific installation by Wangechi Mutu was all created while she was in Nairobi. I was here in New York, and we were just sort of pulling bits of various works and objects together to create this shrine room. This was the first thing that one encountered when entering the exhibition. And it was sort of the calm before the opening into the rest of the universe or galaxy of the exhibition. I'll just share a couple install shots. On the floor, you have Maria Barrio. This was the first sculpture that she ever did, and I was very chuffed to be the first person to show it. Because of COVID, the originating institution was not able to show it, so I borrowed it and got to be the first person to show it. Fierle Baez on the back wall, and then in the left corner, Rose B. Simpson. I include this image. This is a install shot of Sin Wai Kin, formerly known as Victoria Sin, video image, just as a testament to curating over Zoom and the power of being able to do studio visits with people across the world. I learned about Wai Kin's work maybe a month before the exhibition was actually installed, and I'm pretty sure everyone at the museum wanted to kill me because I was like, I have to have this artist in the show. I learned about their work through, I think, a Art Basel feature on them, and all of their work is rooted in futurisms and science fiction and inspired by Octavia Butler. So it was really important for me to be able to include it. And so I reached out, we did a Zoom studio visit, and ended up being able to show video. And in this show, it was really important, again, for me to be inclusive with the types of perspectives that I was including. So the artists range from people that are well known as futurist artists, Saya Wolfach, Wangechi Mutu, Chitra Ganesh, to kind of a younger, chronologically younger group of artists who are reinterpreting what futurism means. So Clarissa Tosin, Tourmaline, these are sort of older futurist artists, Huma Baba, Saya Wolfach, who very graciously did a site-specific piece for me. Chitra Ganesh, also a site-specific piece. And the final thing I'll share with you before I open it up for questions is the last show that I did at the Bronx Museum, which was Wardell Milan's America, God Bless You If It's Good to You, which was, I think, one of the more difficult shows for audiences because it was so overt. The premise of the show is it's a two-part show. The first part of the exhibition, the idea is exploring what white supremacist terrorists do when they're not terrorizing. So sort of the how mundane hate can be. And so the second part of the exhibition was a performance space that we built out, modeled after the Rothko Chapel, in which a series of dance-based performances happened that sort of functioned as a salve to the violence that happened in the first room. And so what you see here is an example of one of the performances, which was Notes on a Black Body. And here you have Wardell on the right and his collaborator Z, who choreographed all of the performances. And the performances included the Black body, the trans body, the migrant body, the female body, and I'm forgetting the last one. But again, all of them were sort of amplifying and sort of giving a visual movement-based experience through performers who lived those experiences. And here are just a few images from the more violent side of the show. Some detail shots. Oh, and I guess that is the last one. So I will end it there, and I guess I'll open it up for questions.